And now the meeting is open for the sharing of testimonies of healing through Christian Science. Pilar from New York, go ahead.
Good evening. Last week I was prompted or led to read the 91st Psalm by Mrs. Evans, with the interpretation that Mrs. Evans gives in that booklet. I had no idea why. I started almost every day reading that, and on the way to work and coming from work, and I just kept reading it and finding a lot of things to think about. Unbeknownst to me, my brother was flying from Florida to San Francisco, to the West Coast, and during the flight, they had an emergency. The cabin filled up with smoke, and they had to do an emergency landing in Dallas, Texas. And then he boarded another plane and continued with his trip. I find out about this afterwards, and I'm really in awe to see how God tells us, prompts us, and guides us to know and to study and to read just what we need to read and study at a particular time. I am so grateful that everything went smoothly and that my brother was safe. I am very grateful for everything that I'm learning in this church. I'm very grateful for that 91st Psalm and the interpretation that Mrs. Evans wrote. And thank you so much for those wonderful readings. Every week, I always said, well, maybe the reading won't be so good or whatever, but every week, every Wednesday, they're just wonderful and what I need to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Donna from Oregon, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. A while back on the round table, they mentioned a book by Henry Drummond titled The Greatest Thing in the World. My practitioner also said what a wonderful book it was and that I should read it. I went to the public library and checked it out. After I read it, I was so impressed with it that I wanted a copy of my own, so I bought one at the bookstore. The whole book is about love, how important it is, and how we should incorporate it into every aspect of our lives. If you haven't read it yet, you should. It's a small book, only 55 pages, and it doesn't take much time to read. In the last chapter of the book titled The Defense, Mr. Drummond recommends we read the last chapter once a week for 3 months. He said a man did that once and it changed his whole life. I was very impressed when he said on page 30 in the old library copy that to enter heaven you have to take it with you. That makes so much sense. That sentence wasn't in the copy I bought from the bookstore, but it was in the old one. Mr. Drummond also talks about love being the only thing you can count on to last. Everything else is fleeting and temporary. Several years ago, I saw a scientist on TV who said, everything we thought we knew 50 years ago isn't true today, and everything we know today won't be true 50 years from now. But as Paul says in the Bible, love never faileth. I know I say this quite often, but the round table has so much helpful information that I can't help mentioning it again. I'm extremely grateful to all who contribute to it for our benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Before coming to Plainfield, I had a very low estimation of what I was worth or capable of. I expected very little out of myself and this life. But now, with all I am learning here about the truth of God's reality, I've begun to see how capable we all are when we rely on God alone. As Mrs. Eddy's article Place says, quote, God wisely, intelligently, and lovingly controls, guides, protects, prospers, and blesses this union of his idea, man, and his normal activity, work, unquote. Because of this, I've begun to truly trust that God will direct me towards the work I need to do and give me everything I need to do it. What a joy it is to know that if it is truly for me to do, I will be able to do it. There is no need to worry that I don't deserve to do it, or that I'm not smart enough to do it, or I won't have the resources. Those things are impossible with God directing me to my purpose and place. I'm very grateful to be a member of this church and for all I've learned here about Christian Science, about God, and about myself. These changes would never have happened if it wasn't for coming here. Also, I need to say how thankful I am for my practitioner, not only for daily support, but for sending me the article Place by Mary Baker Eddy right when I needed it. That article keeps showing its deeper meanings as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale from Virginia, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for a healing I had last week of altitude sickness. My husband and I took a trip to the mountains, something we have done for years with no ill effects. I thought I had prepared for this trip, but one thing after another kept happening. A very long flight delay, weather problems, a fire alarm where we were staying, plus other things that I let bother me. And even though I tried to work prayerfully, I found myself under quite a cloud and quite miserable. I called a practitioner in this church who got me back on track, working and waiting only on God. In a very short time, I went from feeling miserable, weak, and in pain to not only feeling perfectly well and strong, but my joy was restored in feeling the presence and power of God. I can't express my gratitude enough for this church and for the very faithful and loving practitioner. No matter what the problem, if we seek help sincerely and are willing to do our part in turning to and listening only to God, as the practitioner said from Proverbs, the blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it. I'd like to add also that every single detail of the rest of our trip was completely harmonious. We had joyous interactions with others and opportunities to help people, all according to God's plan. I'm very grateful for this meeting tonight, for the wonderful readings on the key to healing, for the other testimonies, and for the beautiful music. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen from Massachusetts, go ahead.
Good evening. I'd like to give thanks to this church for all that I'm learning. I feel that I'm finally learning how to live and to live in the presence of God every moment. And I know that God is love, and he directs all of our paths. And God is always right and loving and just encircles all of us with love. And as I walk forward in this mental, mortal dream, I have the strength to go forward and to know that God is right there with all of us, and he is good and good only, and that evil suggestions are not real. And I'm learning to be stronger and to see the truth. And I'm very grateful because I'm learning that here through the teaching of this church. Thank you very much for the reading tonight and for the music. Thank you.
Thank you. Day from Georgia, go ahead.
Thank you. During our most recent roundtable discussion, it was pointed out that as God's children, we're not meant to go from problem unto problem, but rather from victory unto victory. Since coming to this church, I've realized that I don't have to experience the ongoing roller coaster feeling of extreme highs and lows as I once did. I'm thankful for the article, Our Salvation, by Edward Kimball, found on our website, which explains how we are to overcome challenges. It reads in part, quote, when we turn for power from matter to spirit, we move mountains, surmount all obstacles, achieve success, and overcome fear. Every claim of evil that comes to us can be made a stepping stone. The more that is coming to us, the faster we are climbing out of it all. Rest in the assurance of truth's triumph. Put all responsibility upon God. All we have to do is to declare the truth, deny the error, and abide in Him. Unquote. I found that some synonyms for abide are obey, follow, acknowledge, and respect. This evening, while on my last break at work, I found some very disturbing news on the television. I immediately felt a sense of helplessness, though when I returned to my desk, I found the Kimball article, which gave me the inspiration I needed. It reminded me of the significance and sufficiency of the work that we're taught to do in this church. I was reminded that the work we're doing is so important because it is enough. The truth that we're taught in this church is the answer to everything. And I know that I'm to work more vigorously to continue to do my part by acknowledging, respecting, following, and obeying God more, moment by moment, in order to continue in the victory of truth, which is the victory for all. I'm so grateful to know that our individual work does bless the whole. This is most encouraging. I'm so grateful for all the work that's continuing to go on in this church. I'm so grateful to be even a small part of it. Thank you so much for tonight's readings, for all the testimonies. I'm very, very grateful to be here tonight.
Thank you. Luann from New York, go ahead.
Thank you. I am very grateful for all that Christian Science has done for me. The impact of studying the Bible, Mrs. Eddy's Science and Health was Key to the Scriptures, and working with my practitioner has made a remarkable difference in the way I live. It seems like ages ago, but I recall the many nights I laid in bed praying for death to come and relieve me of my pain and suffering. I was so selfishly ready to throw away that which I did not understand. I thought that if God was all-powerful, why didn't He just take away all my suffering? But I have since come to appreciate His timing, patiently waiting for me to put Him above all else. Through my education in science and the examples set before me in this church, I am learning the true sense of sacrifice, humility, charity, mercy, and divine love. I am so grateful to my practitioner for challenging me to rise above that, to rise higher than I ever knew was possible, and helping me to find my strength in Christ to overcome all that is opposed to God's good, reassuring me that with God all things are possible. I am grateful for the many healings I have had that build one upon the next, bringing me closer to understanding my oneness with God. Since coming to this church and working with my practitioner, I have come to embrace the life God has prepared for me and all that it has to offer. I have found that there is no greater peace than the peace that comes when working for God. I feel so truly blessed to be a part of this family in Christ. Thank you all.
Thank you. Chardell.
The readings tonight, I know, are for all mankind, but they're very personal to me, and I thank you. And then tonight, I would like to offer my gratitude for the teaching and learning that happens here at the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent and how it is shared with the world. During the roundtable on February 11th about spirit, one of the synonyms for God, a question was asked about Isaiah 40:31, which reads in part, quote, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength," end quote. What does it mean to wait upon the Lord? Here are some of the ideas that were expressed. Waiting is active. You will be refreshed. Rely on the Father for your strength. God is right there all the time. He is present. Don't rush ahead of God's time. Then someone said it was like being like a waiter. And after the round table, a young man from Sunday school said, yes, a waiter listens first, takes the order, and then serves. I don't know if that was a direct quote, but I thought it was awesome. Where God is concerned, this is what we should do. Wait, listen for the order, and then serve Him. Thank you, Plainfield Church, for these great classes. And thank you for the beautiful music also. Good evening.
Thank you. Fairley from Maryland, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the readings on healing. I'm so grateful to be a member of the Plainfield Church. It's changed my whole life. And I am grateful for the healings that I've had here and for the faithful support of my practitioner. And I want to mention something that occurred for me about 5 years ago. When I first came here, I got a very bad cold, which was not unusual. In the fall, I got a very bad cold, or in the winter, I guess. And so my practitioner told me to go look up Mary Baker Eddy's prose works, miscellaneous writings, I've Got Cold. I tried to work with that at that time, but I still had a persistent cold that lasted longer than usual. The next year, the same sort of symptoms occurred. So I got out that article and looked it up, read it. When the child Mrs. Eddy speaks about says to the doctor, I've got cold, Mrs. Eddy points out, what if that sweet child, so bravely confessing that she had something that she ought not to have, and which Mama thought must be gotten rid of, had been taught the value of saying even more bravely and believing it, I have not got cold. This time I simply stated for myself, whenever I felt the symptoms, I have not got cold. The symptoms soon stopped, never developed into a cold, and that was 5 years ago, and I've never even had a symptom of a cold since then, year after year, never again. I'm very grateful for everything I've learned here at Plainfield. I'm grateful for Christian Science. I'm very grateful to God for His ever-presence, grateful to Jesus for all that He's taught us, to Mrs. Eddy for giving us this science. And thank you very much for the whole service and the readings on healing.
Thank you. Linda.
Thank you for the readings tonight and the music. Tonight I'd like to express my gratitude for an instructive testimony that was titled, quote, Surrender to God's Care, end quote, by Florence Roberts. I have been learning here how to pray and use Christian Science in all my moments. This testimony reminded me to put my focus on God rather than worrying about the tricky traffic conditions. Her wording that night alerted me that I needed to affirm more of God's presence and control everywhere. Hearing her example and her healing of a fear of driving around trucks was reassuring, especially since that day had been a very tricky freeway drive. That night, the drive home, surrounded by many trucks, was very peaceful. I'm also very grateful for practitioner support for driving that prepared my heart to receive this. It is such a blessing to have so many ways to hear the truth shared and repeated so we can make it practical in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Bruce. Recently, I was standing in my house looking out of my yard and looking at my boysenberry bushes, and I found myself thanking God for this church and Christian Science. And that may sound a little unusual, except for the fact that boysenberries make a delicious fruit, but their harvest time spans only about 2 weeks, and the rest of the summer is spent with a lot of pruning and trimming and eliminating overgrowth and old growth. I'm thinking, that's what I've experienced in this church. It was a time of a lot of pruning away of the things that needed to be pruned away so that the good fruit of God's qualities can be expressed and realized and come to light. So I know that that's what's happened to me. I've experienced it. A lot of pride and selfishness and fear and things that God never put on anybody through Christian Science have been pruned away. And the more genuine qualities of goodness have been allowed to come through. So for that, I'm thanking God, thanking this church and Christian Science, and our leader, Mary Baker Eddy, who gave us this wonderful revelation. Betty from California, go ahead.
I want to say thank you for the beautiful music and for the wonderful readings tonight. I'm very grateful this week for help received from a Plainfield practitioner in regards to some dental work that I needed to have done. The appointment had been scheduled before my regular, normal teeth cleaning appointment. It was on the same day. And so when I called the practitioner, I asked for help with this. She agreed to help. She said to know the presence and power of God and to work with the scientific statement of being, and that all substance is in spirit, God. And I was able, before I went and all during the procedure, I was able to work with these statements. And the work was done in a very straightforward manner with no glitches, and all went very well. There was actually about a half an hour or so before my cleaning appointment left, so I started reading The Love is the Liberator that I had brought along. And I was struck by the article called Their Inward Parts by Carol Conroy, where the statement from Jeremiah 31, verse 33, quote, I will put my law in their inward parts. And just after that it says, quote, so everything within our being, our organs, bones, blood, etc., is controlled by God's law, unquote. I held to this as well as the other statement, and all went very well with the cleaning, too. And I was able to text the practitioner that all went well. I'm so very grateful for Mary Baker Eddy, who discovered Christian Science and made it available to everyone, for the Plainfield Church, and for practitioner help. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol.
A couple of months ago, I began to feel some symptoms of high blood pressure. So I tried handling it and I worked on it, but I realized there was a lot of fear there. So I called for help from a practitioner. And the practitioner told me that life does not depend on the body. It is the God life shining in you throughout every corner of your being. And to remember that the only pressure is, as Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health, the constant pressure of the apostolic command to come out from the material world and be separate. And she also gave me a couple of practical suggestions that I should walk around more and be a little more active, because I do sit at my desk all day long at work, and at night I sit with my laptop on my lap doing more work. So I've been working at doing more walking around and doing a little more exercises, and I haven't had it again since. It's been a good couple of months now, and I have not had one trace. I am so grateful for the healing power of God, and so grateful for the practitioner's help. I can't be grateful enough. Thank you so much for the readings, too.
Thank you. Mary.
Okay, I'll read a few things from our church website bulletin board. The First Maryland. I'm very grateful for the roundtable we had on February 4th about love. It had helped deepen my understanding of love, the greatest thing in the world. We were referred to Mrs. Eddy's articles, Taking Offense and Love Your Enemies. It was pointed out that reacting to error is the bridge over which we can become part of the problem. Warning about self-righteousness and many other points covered. And then Florida. I would like to express gratitude for the various testimonies I've heard over the past 6 months at your Wednesday night meetings. Last Wednesday evening, I was faced with an opportunity to cling to the truth and not submit to error. The battle went on for quite a while in the night, but I kept affirming the truth, as all of you have shared at one time or another. Your own victories in similar circumstances gave me added strength to hang on. I need not buy the lie. I began to feel a lessening, a letting up of intense pressure, and was able to return to bed and sleep well with no adverse effects of animal magnetism in the morning. God is love. Thank you, Christ Jesus, Mrs. Eddy, Plainfield Church, and loving practitioner support. And then New Jersey. I love Luann's paintings and look forward to them in every issue of Love is the Liberator. Her paintings have a lovely softness about them, but there is also an underlying strength that you can see and feel. Thank you for them, Luann. They are so beautiful. And then Massachusetts, thank you so much for last Wednesday's testimony meeting themed, Fear Not, Trust Love's Constant Care. It has been so helpful to me this week in facing down many fears. And then Virginia, I'm so amazed and very grateful at the same time at how I am finding time and time again that the Wednesday evening meeting readings and the testimonies always provide a powerful thought for me to work with in challenges that I might be dealing with that week. Years ago, I would always find that the Christian Science Sentinel would do the same thing. I would always be taken back at how a title of an article on the cover would be exactly what I needed for that week. But that has all changed, unfortunately, and I cannot express enough gratitude for finding this beloved church and for all the God-directed good it provides to me, my family, and to the world. With much love and gratitude. And then this is a testimony from Florida entitled, Prayer Provides Immunity and Contagious Disease Prove Powerless. I was fortunate to grow up in a loving home where Christian Science was cherished and practiced. The memory of many childhood healings left no doubt in my thought about the effectiveness of prayer as taught in Christian Science, to heal both quickly and permanently. One particular healing stands out. It was actually a healing my brother had of a contagious disease. I was about 10 years old at the time. My parents believed it to be German measles, based on all the symptoms. A Christian Science practitioner was called for healing prayer. And I would just like to mention, this person told me that the practitioner who was called had been a friend of Gilbert Carpenter Sr., and that she called him actually Dad Carpenter and would visit him in Rhode Island, and that it was through him, I'm sure, that this family got the so-called, quote, unauthorized books of Martha Wilcox and Bicknell Young and others. So this family was able to have this treasure trove of wonderful works. And she said this practitioner was such a wonderful healer, and she was also a teacher. By that I mean teaching as she healed. And this person said that she had never found this since that time until she came to our church, where here too we have not only just healing but also teaching as how to live this science. So I will continue. A Christian Science practitioner was called for healing prayer, and my brother was healed quickly. The practitioner also prayed to know that man was immune from disease, as well as that there was no contagion. Consequently, no one else in the family could contact this belief called disease, and no one did. My brother's quick healing was the end of it. As Mary Baker Eddy states in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, quote, "Truth handles the most malignant contagion with perfect assurance," end quote. And then also the prophylactic and therapeutic, that is, the preventative and curative arts, belong emphatically to Christian Science, also from Science and Health. I did not think about this experience for years until I had a sleepover with my best friend in high school. She and I shared the same bed during the night, and both of us went to school together the next day. By mid-afternoon, my friend, who was not a Christian Scientist, was sent home from school with German measles. Her case was medically confirmed, as her father was a medical doctor. I never came down with any of the symptoms of this disease. Then, as an adult and in my early 40s, I was required to have blood tests done for some international travel. I remember the nurse coming out of the back with the results and saying, "Your tests are all fine. And oh, by the way, you still have an immunity to German measles." She then stated that the effectiveness of childhood vaccinations would have usually worn off at that point in my life, and it was very unusual to find that I still had this immunity. Apparently, prayer had resulted in a lifetime immunity to this disease, as I am now, humanly speaking, many years beyond this blood test and still have never contracted this disease. I just smiled and thanked her for her work. I did not tell her that my parents were Christian Scientists and had successfully applied for an exemption from vaccinations when I was a child. Nor did I tell her that I had never had the disease. I was smiling because I knew the good report was the result of those early childhood prayers by a beloved practitioner, proving once again that prayer is the most effective and reliable means of protection from disease, and that prayer can be both curative and preventative. As an expansion of this concept, as God is immaculate and pure, so is man, and therefore man is immune to anything that would say otherwise. And an additional thought on contagion and immunity, which may prove to be beneficial to the reader, is that I experienced childhood colds, etc., which seemed normal at the time, but I was always healed of these false claims. I was told by a practitioner at a later date that as one grows in science, one will cease to have colds and flu because progress is the law of being. A paraphrasing of Miscellany, quote, "For progress is the law of infinity," end quote. This has proved to be the case. I just stopped getting them. How wonderful that our own spiritual progress will also provide immunity to disease. For this experience and for the many healings which I have experienced over my lifetime, I am truly grateful. I am so grateful for Christian Science. I'm grateful for that timely testimony when we hear so much about flu seasons and flu shots and contagion, and to know in Christian Science we do have the perfect immunity, and that is the expression of life, truth, and love. That radiation of joy keeps us immune from all these false suggestions, which sometimes lead to physical problems. At one time in my life, I also suffered from colds and flu and everything else every winter. And one time, a practitioner who was helping me told me that a cold is a form of crying. And I realized then that I had been depressed and even crying at that time, and it seemed to have taken form in this cold that was lasting for several weeks. That left a big impression on me, and as Fairley mentioned, the work that we get done in science doesn't just stop in a day or a week or even a year. It's continuous. And so the next year, thinking about that and thinking about how this cold is a form of crying, I made sure that I was expressing much joy and gratitude, that I was not going to be depressed or whining or full of self-pity about anything. And as I expressed joy and gratitude and all the good qualities of God, I never came down with cold or flu. That was a wonderful winter, and so it has been. God gives us immunity from anything that is not like Him. That's His law. And in Mrs. Eddy's wonderful article on contagion in Miscellaneous Writings, she says, "If only the people would believe that good is more contagious than evil, since God is omnipresence, how much more certain would the doctor's success and the clergyman's conversion of sinners? And if only the pulpit would encourage faith in God in this direction, and faith in mind over all other influences governing the receptivity of the body, theology would teach man, as David taught from Psalms, because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High thy habitation, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling." Thank God for Christian Science. Thank God that we have these wonderful services, that we can be here together and hear the beautiful healing readings and the powerful healing testimonies, everyone sharing the good that they've experienced. I'm so grateful to be here tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.